Imagine Christmas Eve. Snow dusting the front porch you helped pay for. Grandchildren's laughter coming through windows you installed yourself. The smell of the prime rib you drove 40 minutes to buy drifting from a kitchen where your daughter-in-law suddenly won't look you in the eye. Then your son sets down his fork, clears his throat, and says the words you never once imagined hearing from a boy you coached, drove, bled for, and put through school with your own 2 hands. Dad, we need you to find somewhere else to live. You're dragging us down. I set my fork down without a sound. I left before the dishes were cleared. And when my son showed up at my door the next morning, I didn't let him in. Before I go any further, if you're watching this, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. I read every single one. The ornament I'd hung that afternoon was still spinning slowly when Derek pushed back from the table. A glass cardinal, one of the set my wife Ruth had collected over 30 years, one for every Christmas we'd shared together before the cancer took her 2 years ago. I remember thinking that the cardinal kept spinning even as everything else in the room went perfectly still. My name is Frank Calloway. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a licensed master electrician in Harwood, Ohio. Built a business from a single van and a set of tools my father left me, and raised one son who I believed, until that December evening, was the finest thing I'd ever made. Derek is 42. He works in commercial real estate, drives a company lease, wears shirts that cost more than my first week's wages. His wife, Vanessa, teaches yoga 3 mornings a week and manages what she calls the household brand, which I later learned meant their Instagram account. Their kids, my grandchildren, Cooper, who is 11, and Lily, who has just turned 8, are the reason I agreed to move in after Ruth died. Not for me, for them, because Derek asked me to. Sat across from me at the diner on Route 9, 4 months after the funeral, and said, "Dad, the kids need you close. We need you close. The basement's finished. You'd have your own space." I agreed because I missed Ruth every single minute of every single day, and the house we'd shared for 28 years felt like a museum I was curating alone. What Derek didn't mention at that diner, and what I'd been too grief-fogged to think clearly about, was that close had a price attached to it. Within 2 months of moving into that finished basement, I was covering half the monthly utilities without being asked. I replaced the water softener when it failed in February. When Derek's work truck needed a transmission in March, he mentioned it at dinner on a Tuesday, and I had a check on the counter by Thursday, $11,000. He thanked me the way you thank someone for passing the salt. I paid for Cooper's travel baseball registration, equipment bag, and 3 weekend tournaments. I bought Lily her first real piano, a second-hand Yamaha upright I found, refinished, and hauled down from Cleveland myself. I fixed every electrical issue in the house, rewired the garage workshop, installed the outdoor lighting Vanessa had wanted since before I moved in. I never handed over an invoice. I never mentioned it at dinner. That is what fathers do. That, I believed, was what family meant. By December, I had contributed just over $40,000 in cash, labor, and materials in 18 months. I know that number exactly because I am an electrician. I document everything: work orders, receipts, bank transfers, all of it kept in a green accordion file I've maintained since 1987. The prime rib had been resting on the counter for 20 minutes when Derek cleared his throat. Cooper had gone quiet first, the way kids do when they feel a storm coming before adults admit it's there. Lily kept coloring the placemat the restaurant had given her at Thanksgiving that she'd apparently saved. Vanessa and I have been talking. Derek's voice had that practiced evenness that told me the speech had been rehearsed, probably more than once, about the living situation. Vanessa straightened her silverware. She has a talent for suddenly becoming deeply interested in objects whenever conversations get uncomfortable. The basement arrangement isn't working for us anymore. He adjusted his watch. He does that when he's nervous. Has since he was 16. We feel like we need our own family space. For the kids, for our marriage, for our growth. Growth. I turned the word over in my mouth the way you test a wire with your tongue to check for current. You're saying you want me to leave. We're saying the current arrangement isn't sustainable. Vanessa's voice, smooth as a recorded message. It's not about love. It's about healthy household dynamics. And the $40,000? I said it quietly. Not as a threat. Just because it was a fact, the way a framing stud is a fact, or a load-bearing wall is a fact. Derek's jaw tightened in a way I recognized from every argument we'd had since he was 9 years old. Those were gifts, Dad. You offered. Nobody asked you to write those checks. Nobody asked me to work 16-hour days for 30 years either, I said. I did it because that's what I understood love to mean. Cooper had his phone face down on the table. He was staring at the grain of the wood. Lily had stopped coloring. You're making this about money, Vanessa said, and it's really about energy. Your energy in the house affects all of us. The kids feel it. Derek feels it. We've talked to our therapist about this. I looked at my son, really looked at him. He had Ruth's eyes and my stubborn jaw, and somewhere in the last 10 years he had become a stranger who used words like energy and therapist the way I used wire gauges. Technical, defensive, designed to end conversations rather than have them. Fine, I said. I picked up my napkin from my lap, folded it once, and set it beside my plate. Dad, don't be. I said, fine, Derek. I stood, and my knee ached the way it always does in cold weather. The souvenir from a fall off a ladder in 2009 that I never had properly looked at because the deductible was too high that year. Enjoy the roast? I bought it. I went downstairs, and I packed. Not everything. Just what mattered. 3 changes of work clothes, my good jacket, my shaving kit, the green accordion file, my tools, and Ruth's photograph from the nightstand, the one from our 25th anniversary. Her laughing at something off camera, her hair still mostly dark. I wrapped it in a flannel shirt and placed it on top of everything else. Upstairs, I could hear Vanessa and Derek talking in low, urgent voices. Cooper's bedroom door opened and closed. Lily's voice asked something that got answered in a hush. I came up the basement stairs with my duffel over one shoulder and my toolbox in my other hand. The Christmas tree lights blinked in the living room. The cardinal ornament had stopped spinning. Derek was standing in the kitchen doorway. He looked like a man who had expected a different outcome from his own plan. You don't have to leave tonight, he said. It's Christmas Eve. You just told me I'm dragging your family down. I kept my voice level. The same voice I used when I had to tell a homeowner their entire panel needed replacing and it was going to cost them more than they budgeted for. Clear, factual, no cruelty, no comfort. I won't stay where I'm not wanted. Dad, tell the kids Merry Christmas for me. I walked out the front door and stood on the porch for a moment in the cold. The neighborhood was quiet except for a dog barking somewhere on the next block, and the muffled sound of a television through the Hendersons' front window across the street. Dave Henderson was in his driveway, scraping ice off his wife's car. He saw me with the bag and the toolbox, and he stopped scraping. I raised my hand. He raised his. I walked to my truck. I drove for 20 minutes without any particular destination. Just the familiar grid of Harwood streets I'd been driving since I got my license at 16. Past the lot on Meridian, where Callaway Electric used to have its office before I sold the business 3 years ago. Past the high school where Derek played defensive end and I never missed a home game. Past the Lutheran church where we buried Ruth on a Tuesday in October with more people in the pews than I knew how to account for. The Lakeview Motor Inn sits on Route 9, about 2 miles from the interstate. It's been there since the 1970s and looks it. The night clerk, a young man with a beard and earbuds around his neck, barely looked up when I came in. I paid cash for a weekly rate, $62 a night. The room had a brown bedspread, a television bolted to the dresser, and a window that looked out on the parking lot and the highway beyond it. I sat on the edge of the bed and took Ruth's photograph out of the flannel shirt and set it on the nightstand. Well, I said out loud, here we are. My phone had 14 missed calls by the time I woke up on Christmas morning. 12 from Derek, 2 from Vanessa. I turned the screen face down, showered in water that was almost hot, and got dressed. My banking app was open before I'd finished my coffee. December's automatic transfer to Derek's joint account, $2,000, had been scheduled for the 1st of January. I had been covering the difference on his second mortgage payment, the one he'd taken out to finish the basement and add the back deck, every month for 18 months. He hadn't asked me to. But I had offered in a world where I was family, not a drag on household energy. I canceled the transfer. The phone started buzzing almost immediately. I let it ring. I found a diner 2 miles down the highway, a place called Patty's, that smelled like coffee and bacon grease, and was blessedly open on Christmas Day, catering to truckers and insomniacs, and men with nowhere particular to be. I sat at the counter and ordered eggs and toast, and the woman who poured my coffee, a heavy-set woman in her 50s, named Darlene, based on her name tag, looked at my face and said, "Rough night, hun?" And I said, "You could say that," and she topped off my cup without being asked and moved on down the counter, and I appreciated that more than I knew how to say. I was on my second cup when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. "Mr. Calloway? This is Ryan from next door. Derek's neighbor." A pause. "I drove past early this morning and saw your truck was gone. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Ryan Mast was 34. Owned the house directly to the left of Derek's. Had helped me carry lumber when I was building shelving in the garage workshop back in September. A good kid, worked in IT, coached youth soccer on weekends. "I'm fine, Ryan. Thank you for calling." "Derek told us last week you were moving out voluntarily," Ryan said, his voice careful, looking for more independence. I didn't quite buy it, if I'm honest. I looked out the diner window at the gray Ohio sky. "I appreciate that. My dad went through something similar with my uncle," Ryan said. "If there's anything I can do." I took down his number. I wasn't sure why at the time. The knocking came at 7:43 the next morning, a hard, impatient rhythm on the motel room door that I recognized before I was fully awake. Derek had knocked on things the same way his entire life. Too much force, like he expected the world to be denser than it was. I sat up, didn't move to the door. "Dad, I know you're in there. Your truck is in the lot." A pause. Open the door. "We need to talk about this like adults." I looked at Ruth's photograph. Her expression, frozen forever in that particular laugh, offered no specific advice. "The account transfer didn't go through this morning," Derek said through the door. "The bank sent a notification. I need to understand what's happening with that." There it was. Not "how are you?" Not "I'm sorry." Not "Merry Christmas." The money. 36 hours after telling me I was dragging his family down, and the first words through the door were about the account transfer. I got up, went to the door, and looked through the peephole. Derek looked like a man who had not slept. His hair wasn't combed. He was wearing a fleece pullover I'd given him for his birthday 2 years ago, and he hadn't thought to put on a proper coat. "The transfer was canceled," I said through the door. "Intentionally. Dad, that's $2,000. The payment is due on the 8th. I'm aware of when mortgage payments are due, Derek. I've been making them with you for 18 months. Can you just open the door?" A door down the hall opened, and an older man in a bathrobe looked out, assessed the situation, and retreated back inside. "Dad, this is insane. Come home. We can figure this out." "Figure what out?" "The arrangement. Maybe we were too hasty. Maybe we can revisit. I moved away from the door and sat back on the bed. 2 nights ago, you told me in front of your children that I was dragging your family down. I want you to understand something, Derek. I've heard a lot of things from a lot of people in 63 years. I grew up hearing my father say nothing kind. I had a foreman for 6 years who didn't know my first name, just called me the new guy. I've heard customers tell me my work wasn't worth what I charged, which it was, every time. None of that ever stayed with me. What you said on Christmas Eve is going to stay with me." Silence from outside the door. "The transfer is canceled permanently," I said. "You have your boundaries. I have mine." His footsteps went down the hall. I heard his car start. I sat with Ruth's photograph for a long time after that. The thing about 31 years in the trades is that it builds a different relationship with documents than most people have. Every job I ever ran had a paper trail. Permits, inspections, invoices, payment records, warranty cards. When you work in someone's walls, when your decisions are invisible inside the finished product, and the only proof of what you did is the paper you generated, you learn very quickly that documentation is not paranoia, it is professionalism. I spread the contents of the green accordion file across the motel bed that afternoon. Not for anger, for clarity. The way you lay out a wiring diagram before you start troubleshooting. 18 months of canceled checks and electronic transfer records to Derek's accounts. The receipt from the transmission repair, $11,200. The piano invoice. The baseball registration fees and tournament entry forms. The Home Depot receipts for the water softener. The outdoor lighting fixtures. The lumber and hardware for the shelving project. My own detailed work log from the garage rewire. 17 hours at my standard rate of $95 an hour. Labor I had waived as a gift. Gifts. Derek's word. His tone when he said it, dismissive, like I was presenting grocery store flowers as evidence of a mortgage. The total, when I added it up on the notepad from the motel nightstand, came to $43,860. In 18 months, while wearing the same pair of work boots I'd bought in 2021 and telling myself they had another year in them. I took a photograph of the notepad with my phone. Then I photographed each page of the accordion file, systematically, the way I would document a job site before closing the walls. Ryan Mast called that evening. I answered on the second ring. "I heard Derek came by the motel this morning," Ryan said. "Word travels fast in the neighborhood. I wanted to check in. He came about the money," I said. "Yeah." Ryan paused. "Mr. Calloway, I don't know if this is appropriate to say, but I've watched him talk to you for 9 months from across the fence. The way he spoke to you sometimes, about things you'd built or fixed or paid for, it wasn't right." I didn't say anything. "My mother went through something like this with my aunt and uncle," Ryan continued. "There's a group, actually, in Harwood. Senior Resource Center on Clement Street. They have a meeting Thursday nights. Legal aid, financial counseling, support. My mom still goes." I wrote down the address. 2 days after Christmas, I drove to Clement Street. The building was a converted storefront between a hair salon and an insurance office, with a handwritten sign in the window that said Harwood Senior Resource Center, all welcome. Thursday, 6 p.m. I was 40 minutes early. A woman named Gloria Briggs was setting up folding chairs when I came in. She was maybe 68, silver hair cut short, the kind of efficient movements that come from decades of making things work on limited budgets. She shook my hand and told me coffee was terrible, but there was plenty of it, which was exactly what the situation called for. There were 11 people in the circle by 6 o'clock, ages ranging from what I guessed was 58 up to maybe 80. They all had a particular quality to their faces that I recognized because I'd seen it in the mirror since December 24th. Not sadness exactly, something more specific than that. The look of a person recalibrating what they thought they understood. A man named Howard went first, 71, retired postal worker. His daughter had convinced him to add her to his savings account after he had a minor stroke. For emergencies, she'd told him. $90,000 gone to a down payment on a vacation property in Tennessee. She sent him photos of the lake view. A woman named Bernice, 66, had co-signed her son's business loan, $48,000. When the business failed, the loan defaulted in her name. She was working part-time at a garden center to cover the payments. A man named Walt, 75, had given his daughter and son-in-law $50,000, described as a loan for medical expenses. When he asked about repayment, she told him the stress of being asked was triggering her anxiety disorder, and he should talk to her therapist before contacting her again. Each story landed like a hand pressing on a bruise. Different shapes, same pressure. When my turn came, I stood without quite meaning to. Old habit from union meetings. "Christmas Eve," I said. My son told me I was dragging his family down, 18 months after asking me to move in to help with his kids after my wife died. $43,000 I can document. College, wedding, business, down payments. I stopped counting years ago on those. "How much total?" Howard asked, not aggressively. The way you ask because the number matters, because it clarifies something. I had done that math on the motel notepad as well. Somewhere over 200,000 if you count everything back to when he started college in 2000. The room was quiet in a specific way. "That's not a gift," Bernice said finally. "That's a career." Gloria, who had been taking careful notes on a legal pad, looked up. Do you have documentation? I have documentation of everything from the last 10 years. Older than that, most of it. That matters. She wrote something, underlined it. I want you to meet someone after tonight, if you're willing. A lawyer who volunteers with us. His name is Paul Gentry. He handles elder financial law. He'll want to see what you have. A man named Clarence, 72, spoke up from across the circle. The thing that gets me, he said, his voice rough, is that I don't want anything from my kids. I never did. I just wanted them to look at me and see a person, not a source. That sentence went through the room like current through a circuit. Every face changed in the same small way. That was it. That was exactly it. Not the money. Never really the money. Just the dignity of being seen as a person rather than a resource to be managed until depleted. I met Paul Gentry that Thursday after the meeting. He was 55, trim, the kind of quiet competence that good lawyers and good electricians share. He looked at my accordion file for 45 minutes without speaking much, only occasionally asking me to clarify a date or confirm a number. Then he set it down and looked at me across the table. This is the most organized documentation I've seen in 11 years of this work, he said. Every one of these transfers is clearly voluntary, but the pattern, the timing, the amounts relative to your own financial constraints, this is a strong picture of a dependent relationship deliberately cultivated by the receiving party. What does that mean practically? It means if he tries to bring any kind of legal challenge to the canceled transfers or makes any claim of mental incapacity, you have a very solid counterposition. He paused. And it means you have grounds for a civil conversation about restitution, if that's something you want to pursue. I don't want money from my son, I said. Paul nodded like he'd heard that before and believed it. What do you want? I thought about Ruth, about the cardinal ornament still spinning, about Cooper going quiet at the table. I want to make sure no one else in this room ends up at the Lakeview Motor Inn on Christmas Eve, I said. That's what I want. Paul was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Tell me more about that. What came together over the next 3 weeks started in a motel room and became something I still don't quite have a name for. That fits it right. The Harwood Senior Resource Alliance. That's what we settled on, though the formal paperwork says Harwood Senior Mutual Aid Fund. Paul handled the legal structure. Gloria handled the organizational framework. Howard turned out to have 30 years of union treasury experience. Bernice had run the books for a nonprofit garden program for 12 years before her son's loan default forced her to return to work. We opened an account at First Community Bank on January 8th. Initial deposits from 7 founding members, myself included, totaled $22,000. Rebecca Stanton, the branch manager, cleared her conference room for the paperwork signing and told us, with the kind of directness that makes Midwestern bankers different from everyone else, that she wished something like this had existed when her own mother was alive. I moved out of the Lakeview on January 10th and into a 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building on Elm, 5 blocks from Riverside Park, where I used to take Derek to feed the ducks when he was small. The apartment had good light and enough room for my tools and Ruth's photograph and not much else, which suited me. I went to the senior center on Thursday evenings. I volunteered at the food bank on Tuesday mornings. I went for long walks in the cold. Derek's calls came in diminishing clusters, 3 or 4 in a day, then silence for a week, then another cluster. I listened to the voicemails but didn't return them. They moved through phases I recognized from watching him grow up. First, impatience. Then accusation. Then something that sounded like it was trying to be reasonable without quite managing it. Then, in late January, genuine distress in his voice that I recognized because I was the one who had taught him what distress sounded like when it was real. The news coverage was not something I planned. Gloria had mentioned our organization to a woman she knew at the Harwood Courier, and the Courier did a small piece in mid-January, a human interest sidebar about elder financial resource programs. A reporter from the Columbus affiliate picked it up. I agreed to an interview partly because Paul advised that visibility was its own kind of legal protection, and partly because what Clarence had said in the first meeting had not left me. The dignity of being seen. The reporter, a young woman named Adrienne Park, who reminded me of Ruth's youngest niece, asked me what I most wanted viewers to understand. That it costs nothing to be decent to the people who built your life, I said. Nothing. And the price of not being decent is something you will pay for a long time. It was not the most quotable thing I said in that interview, but it was the truest. The piece ran on a Wednesday evening. By Thursday morning, I had 47 messages from people I didn't know, most of them from Ohio, some from as far as Arizona and North Carolina. Every one of them had a version of the same story. The textures were different. The core was identical. I gave them all Gloria's number. Derek saw the broadcast. I know because Ryan Mast called me on Thursday morning and told me he had watched Derek sit in his car in the driveway for 40 minutes the previous evening before coming inside. In February, we made our first crisis disbursement, $2,400 to prevent Bernice's foreclosure on the co-signed loan. We gathered in Gloria's living room to present the check. 8 people around a kitchen table with a pot of coffee and a plate of store-brand cookies, and Bernice cried in a way that made everyone look somewhere else, out of respect for her, and then she laughed at herself for crying. And then we all laughed, and it was the first time in 2 months that a room felt warm to me. Walt had an idea that night that became the thing I am most proud of. A visiting fund, he called it. Money set aside specifically to facilitate contact between estranged grandparents and grandchildren when parents were using visitation as financial leverage. Legal fees, transportation, mediation costs. Because the grandchildren, Walt said, his voice steady but careful, are not weapons. They are not bargaining chips. They are children, and the damage done to them is the part of this that lasts the longest. We voted yes unanimously. Cooper called me in February. Not Derek, not Vanessa. Cooper. On a Tuesday evening from what I later understood was the school library. Grandpa. His voice was 11 years old and trying to be older. Are you okay? I'm okay, buddy. Are you okay? Not really. A pause. Dad's different. He doesn't yell, but he's really quiet. Like, too quiet. Mom's been crying in the bathroom. Lily thinks it's her fault somehow, and I don't know how to tell her it isn't. I held the phone and looked at Ruth's photograph. It isn't her fault, I said. It isn't your fault. What's happening with your dad and me is between your dad and me. You understand? But why can't it just be fixed? Some things take time to fix, I said. When something in a house gets wired wrong, you can't just tape over it and call it good. You have to go back to where the problem started and correct it there. Otherwise, it comes back. Cooper was quiet for a moment. Did Dad wire something wrong? Yeah, I said. He did. Is he fixing it? I think he's starting to understand that he needs to, I said. That's the first step. Lily got on the phone for a few minutes after that. She told me about a book she was reading and about how the piano had a sticky key now, and she wanted to show me a piece she was learning. I told her I would hear it someday soon. I meant it. The call from Derek came on a Thursday in early March. Not from his cell phone. From the landline I hadn't known they still had. I answered because something about the landline felt like it was a deliberate choice. Like he was trying to communicate something about the seriousness of his intention before he said a word. Dad. His voice had lost the executive smoothness it had been wearing for years. I want to talk. Not about money. Not about the account. Not about any of that. A pause. About us. About what I became and when I became it and why I didn't notice until you were gone. I sat down. I've been seeing someone, he said. A therapist. Not for the language. Not for the tactics. For the actual work. I've been going twice a week since January. He stopped. She asked me last week to describe my father to her. I started talking and I realized I was describing someone I was ashamed to have treated the way I treated you. That's when I understood it. Not as an idea. As a fact. Keep going, I said. You worked double shifts in 2002 so I could go to the study abroad program that all my friends were doing. I complained because you got the wrong airline tickets and I had a middle seat. His voice was rough. You co-signed my first business loan, and when that business failed, I got mad at you for asking how I was going to cover the loss. Like somehow the failure was your fault for believing in me. He stopped again. I moved my family into a house your money helped buy, and then I called you a drag on our energy. On Christmas Eve, in front of your grandchildren, the radiator in my apartment ticked. I know what you did for Mom at the end. Derek said. The nights you didn't sleep, the appointments, selling the business earlier than you planned so you could be home with her. I never said anything about any of it. I just showed up at the funeral and shook hands with people and went back to my life. Like it was just an event that happened. I pressed my thumb and forefinger against my eyes. I am sorry, Dad. The words came out slowly, the way real apologies come, the ones that cost something. I'm sorry for what I said on Christmas Eve. I'm sorry for every version of that I've been saying to you for years in smaller ways that I was too comfortable to notice. I'm sorry I used your grandchildren as an excuse to have you nearby, when what I actually needed was your financial help. And I'm sorry I didn't even have the honesty to know that about myself until you were gone. I was quiet for a long time. Apologies are words, I said finally. I've heard a lot of words in the last 3 months. What I need to know is whether you understand what actually happened, not the money. The decision you made about what kind of person I was. The decision that told me you saw a balance sheet where there was supposed to be a father. I know, Derek said. Yes. I understand that. Then here is what I need from you if we're going to find a way forward. I kept my voice steady. The same voice I used when I had to explain to a young apprentice exactly what had gone wrong and exactly why it mattered. Continue the therapy, real work, not performance. Explain to Cooper and Lily, at their level, what you did and why it was wrong. Not to put yourself down in front of them. To model for them what taking responsibility looks like. Volunteer. 1 Saturday a month at the senior center. Not for me. For you. Because you need to spend time with people who have been through what you put me through. And you need to understand what it cost them. I paused. And stop using my grandchildren as leverage. That means stop trying to use my love for them to make me absorb consequences you should be living with yourself. Derek didn't argue with any of it. He didn't negotiate or reframe or apply qualifications. Yes, he said. All of it. Yes. We met at Riverside Park on a Saturday in March, when the last of the snow was gone from the south-facing slopes, but the shadows still held frost. I brought bread for the ducks. He brought coffee from the place on 5th Street that Ruth had always liked. We sat on the bench and didn't talk for a while, which was its own kind of communication. The ducks were there, the same ones that had been on that pond since Derek was a boy, or their descendants anyway, which amounts to the same thing. Cooper called me in February, I said. Derek nodded. I know, he told me. He was worried about Lily. She thought she'd done something wrong. Derek's voice was quiet. I had to explain to an 8-year-old that her grandfather left because of something I did. Not her. Me. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. Hardest conversation I've ever had. Worse than the therapy. At least in therapy, I'm talking to a professional. Lily just looked at me and said, "But why did you say mean things to Grandpa?" And I didn't have a good answer. What did you tell her? I told her sometimes grown-ups get confused about what matters and forget to be kind. And that being kind is actually the most important thing. More important than houses or money or being comfortable. He paused. She said, "Grandpa always knew that." I said, "Yes, he always did." I watched a mallard turn a tight circle in the cold water. "Your mother would have had a lot to say about all of this," I said. Derek almost smiled. She would have said it once, very quietly, and that would have been enough. "Yes," I said, "that's right." We didn't resolve everything that afternoon. I didn't move back to Oak Street, and I won't. The apartment on Elm suits me. The Thursday evenings at the senior center have become something I don't want to give up, and not just for my own sake. Howard's granddaughter's custody situation needed legal support in January, and the fund covered it. Bernice's loan is now 3 months current. Walt's estranged relationship with his son-in-law is not fixed, but there has been contact, which is a beginning. The thing about electricity, the thing I learned in 31 years of doing this work, is that a damaged circuit can be repaired. It cannot be repaired by pretending the damage isn't there, and it cannot be repaired by rushing. You have to locate the fault, trace it back to origin, make the correct repair with the correct materials, and then test it carefully before you close the walls again. That is not pessimism. That is how the work actually goes. And there is dignity in doing it right. Derek showed up at the senior center on the first Saturday in April. He didn't make a production of it. He just arrived at 8 in the morning in old jeans and a sweatshirt, and asked Gloria what needed doing. She put him to work moving furniture and stacking donated goods and making 24 phone calls to follow up on members who hadn't been to Thursday meetings in 3 weeks. I wasn't there that morning. Gloria told me about it afterward. She said he worked 4 hours without checking his phone once. It's not forgiveness exactly. Not yet. Forgiveness is something that gets earned slowly, the way a reputation gets earned, through repeated small actions that accumulate into something you can trust the weight of. We're in the early part of that process, and I hold no illusions about the timeline. But on a Tuesday evening in April, Cooper and Lily came to my apartment on Elm Street for dinner. Derek dropped them off and didn't come in, which was right. Lily played 3 pieces on the small keyboard I'd bought for the living room, and she played them without making a single mistake. And when she finished, she looked at me with the particular expression of a child who has done something difficult well and wants you to know she knows it. That was excellent, I told her, and I meant it completely. Cooper helped me with the dishes afterward. He's going to be a good man. I can see the architecture of it already in the way he handles things, carefully, attentively, the way someone raised right handles things when they think no one is watching. "Grandpa," he said, rinsing a bowl, "are you and Dad going to be okay?" "We're working on it," I said. He nodded, like that was the right answer. Maybe he understood something about repair that most adults don't, which is that working on something is not a consolation prize for fixing it. Sometimes working on something is the real thing, the honest thing. I dried the bowl and put it away, and the light in the kitchen was good, and somewhere across town, the ducks were on the pond in the March cold, and the senior center would have its Thursday meeting in 2 days, and Ruth's photograph smiled from the mantel in the living room, and it was, all things considered, enough to keep going. If this story meant something to you, please click like, subscribe to the channel, and share what's on your mind in the comments below. Your stories matter. To hear the next story, click the box on the left.